take off until you.
Yeah, we can't take off.
I'm here.
I'll go for a ride here.
Yeah. All right, okay,
I just started it
okay.
when you said be seated.
All right, welcome, and I'll call the meeting to order.
Oh.
First item on the agenda is approval of the November of the minutes. It says November, okay, approval of November 29 agenda, I'm sorry. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Oh, we got new people doing motions. Okay.
Yeah, it's refreshing.
All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. All right, the next is the item to consider is approval of the October 25th Finance Committee minutes. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Okay. Gary, is there a second?
Second.
All right, Nancy, second. All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. All right, Clark, fiscal year 17-18 financial reports and dashboards for September 2018.
Okay, thank you, Rick. We're starting off with the balance sheet as we normally do. There's not a lot of activity that's terribly volatile on the balance sheet since the end of last year. Cash, we've got about a little over $59 million in cash, not including the Medicaid risk reserve. If you include that, we have about $98 million, 98, almost $99 million if that were included. As we'll see later on, our current ratio is good. We do have, the biggest item that has changed on here is probably down in the deferred revenues section, which is there's been a $5.5 million increase in the current year. Most of that is state single stream funds that were paid for the month of October, $3.8 million, and there's an early ADAC funding of about $1.3 million, and then a few of the counties have paid their entire year's balance at the beginning of the year. So fund balance is about $75 million, which is a $3.6 million decrease, which exactly agrees with the income statement for a loss of $3.6 million for the year. So if there's any questions on the balance sheet, we have to entertain those, or we can move on to the statement of cash flow, which is the next document, document number 2 in your packet. And this does not include the Medicaid risk reserve, so we're starting out with our loss from operations of $5.2 million, and then because this is prepared under the indirect method, we look at the changes in the account balances for the balance sheet. It shows overall that there's just a little under a $500,000 decrease in cash for the year, bringing our cash total to the $59,388,346 that we saw on the balance sheet. Moving to the next document, document number 3, which is the current ratio. We'll focus on the total current ratio. This, once again, does not include Medicaid risk reserve because that's a non-current asset. Our current ratio is about 2.08 for the month of September. Basically, that's the $69 million in current assets divided by the $33 million in current liabilities. And now then there's a couple comments I will make relative to this quarter. We have a couple items that have not been booked as of the month of September that are going to come into play for the next, probably the next month or certainly by November. We have the $3.1 million return of single stream funds that we knew was going to come, but we did not get the letter until November the 9th from the state validating that we would get that much money, and that's when they were going to make the wire transfer. So that is not included in here. And there's also, the state has been over recouping from our cash for terminated members. They've been going back too far. So there's a limit on how far they can go back. That's, as of the month of September, that's worth about $2.2 million. That's not reflected in here yet either because we're waiting. The state, I think, paid that back in November, and we were waiting to get those numbers from the state to see if they matched up with our numbers.
Yeah.
And they do. So we actually have a little bit more to collect with them. There's actually about $2.8 million total that is not in here. We collected, I think, 2.2 million of that through the month of November, and we anticipate collecting the rest of it. So those are things that kind of relate back to this period of time, but they aren't recognized in here yet.
So
So-
we actually got the money back before they told us how much they thought we ought to be getting back.
No, we estimated what we should
We
get
knew,
back.
I know you knew.
Yeah, we were estimating what we should be getting back, and we were waiting to see before we booked anything whether that agreed with their numbers, because oftentimes they don't always match up, so. And we have to correct their numbers for them, so.
That's too bad, they don't know how far they need to go back.
So it sounds like it was some sort of programming glitch in their MIS system, so.
Yeah.
So anyway, so if you were to add those, if you were to add the $2.8 million back into the current ratio, our current ratio would actually be a 2.26 rather than 2.08. Moving on to the next document is the defensive interval. This is basically pure cash. Looking at the defensive interval, we're at about 54, a little over 54 days in our defensive interval. And if you were to, and once again, if you were to add back in these dollars that are due us, our defensive interval would move to 59.6 days as opposed to 54.2. So we're actually a little better off than what we're currently reflecting in the September statement.
Not to take you off your game, Clark, but
Okay.
the discussion we had previously, netting out our cash and showing where we were around a 30-day versus this defensive interval.
Yeah, that is not included in there. That was driven purely off of the DMA reports. We just know these are transactions that kind of relate back to this time period that have not been recorded, that will be recorded in a subsequent time period.
So how does one equal one number of days and another equal such a different number of days?
Well, the number is, the number that the state will give us in the month of October and November totals almost $6 million. 3.1 million for the return of single stream funds, 2.8 million for the over recoupment of funds. So that's $6 million. If you take that and add that to our current cash balance and then calculate the defensive interval, it moves at about, what, 5 days? Yes. Which is, yeah, that's consistent. Any questions about that? I don't know, I moved through it pretty quick because I know the numbers fairly well, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to talk about that in a little bit more detail. Okay, moving on to the income statements, document number 5. Looking at the Medicaid activity, on an operating basis, without impact of the risk revenue, our actual results on the Medicaid line of business are a loss of about $6.8 million versus a budget loss of $1.5 million. So that gives us a $5.2 million unfavorable variance. When you add in the risk revenue, it moves those numbers a little bit, but the risk revenue in the budget and the actual are fairly consistent with one another. So if you were to take that $5.3 million unfavorable variance and add back in the $2.8 million Medicaid that they over accrued, that variance would drop to an unfavorable variance of $2.5 million. On the Medicaid portion of the business, we're doing pretty well on that through the first 3 months of the year. We're at a $2.9 million favorable variance. We made about $1.5 million versus a budgeted loss of $1.4 million. If you were to add the $3.1 million single stream return on back into that, that would bring us up to about a $6 million favorable variance. So on a consolidated basis, looking at the two together, our actual results through September are a $5.2 million loss before Medicaid risk revenue and a $3.6 million loss after you add in the Medicaid risk revenue, versus a budget of a loss of $1.2 million. So we've got an unfavorable variance of about $2.4 million. But once again, if you add the sum of these two dollar amounts back in, the $5.2 million or $5.9 million, that brings us, would adjust this to a $3.5 million favorable variance. So we're doing better than what we're actually showing on the financial statements. We know this money is coming in. We just couldn't get the numbers verified in time to record them as cash coming in. So, any questions on the income statement? Okay, if not, we'll move
I
on.
have a quick question. Will those show up the next time we meet?
The next time we meet's in January. I'm not even sure if we have a finance committee at the retreat. I think we give a brief finance report.
We probably need to do that.
Yeah, so in January, we'll probably be doing the November, so they should be on the November financials.
Yeah, we can meet before that.
Yeah.
We're good. We can be there.
Thank you.
So looking at the next document, document number 6 is the medical loss ratio. This is the Medicaid medical loss ratio. We saw this last month when we were looking at financials, the tremendous spike, what looks like a spike in the Medicaid medical loss ratio. And it is a spike, but it's a spike for a couple of reasons. On one, we don't have because this is a ratio of expenses to revenue, and we know that they've over recouped the revenue. That's in large measure causing the spike. Now, we also have a rate increase that took effect in July that is, as we've discussed before, is an inadequate rate increase. It was a rate increase of 1%, and that will not keep up with medical trends in any given level. But you know, this once again, if you were to add back in the $2.8 million that they've over recouped from us, that would drop this medical loss ratio down to about 95.8%. So, any questions on the medical loss ratio?
So it goes from 99.
Yeah, it's at 99.2. If you look at that, 94.8 of that is related to services, and then you also get to add to that the healthcare quality improvement activities, which is worth about 4.4%. That's how you get up to the 99.2. Okay, moving on to the last document that we have in the packet, which is document number 7, which is the Medicaid service budget variance through September. It shows that we're unfavorable to budget relative to the expense, but the mix of services has been pretty consistent between what we budgeted and what we've actually incurred. For instance, the total Medicaid B budget, we budgeted that to be about 63.6% of the total Medicaid expense. It's actually coming in at about 63.3%. If you look at the innovation services, we budgeted that at 34.1%. It's coming in at 34.2%. If you look at the 1915B3 services, we budgeted that at 2.3% versus the actual 2.5%. So everything, you know, in terms of mix of services, we were pretty close to what we budgeted. We are incurring more services than we anticipated we would from a budget perspective, but we also know that we've got a total of a $3.20 unfavorable variance among all of the expenses in total. If you were to take that $2.8 million and plug that in, that's another $5.85. So, we've really got this unfavorable variance more than covered. So, any questions about any of the items on this document? If not, we'll move on to the discussion around financial solvency. And so, at the end of October, the state filed their report with the Legislative Oversight Committee. They filed it on October the 29th. They made some recommendations in that report. They also showed all of the LMEs in the report, so we can see how we kind of stack up against all of them from a solvency calculation perspective. And we actually don't do too badly. I mean, we're a little bit over the threshold of what they calculate. So that out of the 7 LME MCOs, there are 2 LME MCOs, ourselves and East Point, who are above the upper limit. And there are 2 LME MCOs, Partners and Trillium, who are below the lower limit. The other 3 are within the range. So, and we're at 97, almost $98 million versus well, the upper limit is $88 million, but they give you a 5% threshold so that you don't have to do a corrective action plan if you're within the threshold. That's at about $92.5 million. So we're $5 million above that upper threshold. Now, what is everybody else doing? Well, that's always an interesting question. Well, I already told you that 2 are above, 2 are below, and 3 are within the range. Now, the department also made a couple of recommendations as it relates to the calculation. They suggested that instead of using a 15-day and a 30-day extraordinary and catastrophic events measure, they use a 30 and a 60-day catastrophic events measure. So we think that's a step in the right direction in terms of calculation. They also suggested that they take Medicaid risk revenue out of the calculation. And so the cash balances would not include for us, roughly $40 million in Medicaid risk revenue. So our cash, for purposes of this calculation, our cash balances would drop from about $98 million to about $60 million. $60 million. The problem with that is if they do both of those things, they'll throw us below the lower limit because both of those adjustments are too large. So they would have to either do one or the other, or they would have to amend the formula in some fashion so that did not happen.
But wouldn't everybody be below?
Virtually, yeah. The answer to that is everybody
Lower,
would be below.
and all
Everybody
7
would
will be below that.
Right. Now, if they only change the catastrophic measure, there would be a couple within the range, but everybody would still have an issue. But if they do both of them, everybody will be below the range, below the lower range.
So hence the point, you need to change the range.
Right.
In order to do that, you'd have to redo the methodology.
Exactly.
So that's why we're all just sort of frozen on this until the dust settles.
Right.
So the mandate that I think we talked about at the last meeting to spend some 8 point something million is off the table right now.
Well, it's
Or
part
at least
of
on
our
hold.
calculation today,
Sure.
but it may or may not be necessary depending on how this changes.
If you take what is the calculation now, that's the reality of it,
Yeah.
okay? And we believe that calculation is severely flawed.
Mhm.
So, we'll find out what anybody else thinks. I mean, I think I sit in a room, as I mentioned earlier, with the leadership of the state, the CFO, and there isn't anybody that thinks it's right. So,
Great.
Thank you, Gary, how about something?
that's very good.
That's an understatement.
Very impressive, yeah.
What do you think would be right? What would you say should be looked at?
well, number one, the risk reserve is not our money. It's erroneous to act as if it is.
So that should be taken out.
Correct. Number
Okay.
one, that's moves the needle way big.
And what is that number, 40 million, 35, 40 million?
And so at that point, but the true picture is that comes closer.
Oh, I'm not done. That's just my number one ask.
Okay.
My number two ask is, and let me ask you, in your counties, how much cash do you think you need to have to sustain your operations?
16%.
Yeah, I was gonna say 18.
So how many days?
Minimum. I mean, you can get down to 8 before the
How many
LGC.
days?
Well, you can get down to 8 before the LGC.
gonna do that.
60.
Yeah, you don't want to.
60 days? What did he tell you?
You know,
15.
50 is too much. That's holding too much tax money up.
Do you think 15 is the right number of days? You're on the board of directors of a company, a $400 million at-risk insurance company. Does 15 days seem like enough money?
No, that's barely a payroll if you're lucky, so
Yeah.
no.
Well-
It's absurd.
You're not gonna be able to pay bills in a
But-
month, if a bill of a
So-
provider in a month, you're not
Yeah.
gonna be able to handle.
Well, we've got, I mean, most private businesses have credit line. So, you know, sometimes you play into that based on your revenue flow. Your revenue stream is a little bit more consistent, isn't it?
Right.
I mean,
It's
he says yeah and he's saying no.
Well,
You
yeah, I
see?
mean, well, I mean,
Yeah.
most businesses, the reason they have credit, a revolving credit facilities is because they may have receivables that fluctuate, and they need to draw down against that. We don't have a big receivable, we get paid up front every month. We should, you know, most insurance companies, or most MCOs, are cash cows.
Yeah.
You know, because it takes 3 to 4 months to pay out all the bills that you've already been paid 100% for.
But it's spoken for.
Right, it's spoken for. That doesn't mean you're making money.
Right.
It just means you're in a fairly decent cash position. So,
So, you need
Makes
to
sense.
change the number of days to a reasonable figure, okay? At least 30 to 45 or 30 to 60, that would be the range, and move the risk reserve out of the calculation. Those are just no-brainers.
30 days is 8%.
It's a no-brainer.
And 30 days is 8%. That'd be the absolute total minimum ever.
It doesn't work.
But you're talking about 30 or 60 instead of 15 or 45, right?
yeah,
Wasn't that
exactly.
the-
So
So that's all they're asking for. I mean, and that's a low ask. Extremely low ask,
So why, what's the purpose of
you know.
Because they can force us to have,
No
be at
money.
the brink of
Right.
failure.
Yeah.
That's why.
Well, let me ask you,
We've spun that one around this table before.
Yeah, I know.
where is that 40 million?
What 40 million?
The risk reserve?
Risk reserve.
State has it.
It's on our
The-
books, but we don't have
It's on the
access to it.
books, but you don't have access to
Yeah.
it. Why is it even a point of
That's what,
discussion?
that's what.
I can't, yeah,
Till I've been blue in the face.
I know. Well, I'm
But you
just
see how obvious it
reiterating
is?
for you.
I mean, once you understand this, once
It
you
shouldn't-
understand this,
Shouldn't even
it's,
be part of
it's
the
a-
equation.
it's part of a misinformation campaign.
It is.
And as soon as you start fixing it, it takes away those misinformation sound bites, doesn't it?
Well, it's
Well,
basically
then
an
the state would have to
encumbered
account
fund
for it instead of you.
balance. It's basically an encumbered fund balance that's held in the state for trust. I mean, right?
It
So-
exists to protect the state in the
Yeah.
case of our failure and their need to pay claims, period.
But they constantly point to that as you have deployed plenty of money.
As our money,
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
as if
amazing.
it's a spendable amount of cash that we have,
Why
which
don't-
is
do-
factually
So
incorrect.
why don't all the LME MCOs go in together
We did.
and put on a public information campaign?
I'll respond to that later.
Okay,
I have the absolute answer to that.
okay, all right. fair enough.
Any other questions on the solvency?
I hate it for you.
So we're gonna have to wait and see how they change the rules. And that's gonna, I mean,
Yeah.
cause you drop 40 million out and then you protect on the
Yeah.
back end a 30 to 60 day interval,
Exactly.
and you're looking at 90 million, 60 million.
They have to
I mean,
give you more
30 day
money.
Yeah, I mean, we'd be at
So,
60,
if
60
you
You drop
million,
them,
we'd be at 60 million versus a lower limit of 87
Right.
yeah.
if they moved
It's a
to
big deal.
Yeah.
What is the action plan if you're below?
Well, the action plan is they
Give
they
you more
give
money?
you a corrective action
Bake
plan, and you're
sales.
supposed, what are you
Car
gonna do?
wash.
You go to the state and
Bake
ask for
sales
more
and
money?
Well, that's what I was asking.
Yeah.
They'd have to fund you up to the minimum, wouldn't
No,
they? They should, let me put it that way.
That they won't.
Okay.
we're at risk, we are at risk entities.
They would have
That's
to-
why the
yeah.
state
I
has.
still like your
risk
calculations the other way,
Yeah.
because it makes it
If
look
they
right.
take the Medicaid out for everybody, they're gonna have to move the needle down from 87 million to a lower figure. Okay, that's kind of
Yeah.
a fictitious figure if you're calculating Medicaid
reserve.
in.
Here, the whole thing is made up to begin with, I read.
Mhm.
It's all just made up.
Yeah.
I mean, they can move the scale anywhere they want to.
But if they were really concerned, like the LDC, what we deal with is not made up. Those are real things
No,
that they look at
I
to keep
agree.
people from going to debt because they've had counties that the states had to bail out.
Exactly.
So there's real math and real accounting procedures to keep those things going. So if they use those kind of things, saying, we want to make sure you're solvent isn't a bad idea. But just not doing it in a realistic manner is what's throwing us.
So here's what's happened in the past, you raise a very good point. What's happened in the past when LME MCOs were on the brink of financial failure? What does the state do?
Close them down,
What?
close them down.
Well, how's anything get done? They move the contract.
Yeah.
Why did we get the contract to Western Highlands?
Yeah.
State got worried they were gonna have to start writing checks. Gave us the risk for it.
Congratulations.
Same thing with Mecklenburg. State got worried they were underwater. Well, we're not gonna let it touch us. We're gonna give the risk to someone else. Gave it to Cardinal. That's the tool they have that's different than the counties, unless you'd wanna disband your county
We're just-
and have another county
We'll
merge
county
you.
If we get under.
That's what's different for us.
Because when you ask if you can use that money, they're
They
gonna
just
say
make
no.
it somebody else's
I'm
problem,
probably in better shape than us.
31%.
which,
Ours is about
Sure.
30.
Which means it's more important that they maintain solvency or you're going to wipe two entities out.
Well, that,
I
Vaya
took it.
Vaya can't raise
Is that-
taxes.
Is that the
No,
plan?
that's what I'm saying.
So is that the
Yeah.
plan? So is that their plan? I mean, that's their way to.
We do have a little flexibility in how we raise revenue at the county level. You have none.
Exactly.
You just got your hand out.
well, and we have our hand out and they're taking money out of the jar, right? I mean,
Yeah, I
that's how all of
understand.
this, okay,
I see
you got it.
I got it.
And at the same time, you want to even feel worse? How do we get money to begin with? We get money because of our capitation rate being whatever it is, and you can see what it is there on one of the reports, and us managing care in a manner that allows for there to be a little savings. But what happens is those rates get more and more compressed. Your ability to generate savings is reduced. At the same time, so think of a barrel, so you got a little trickle going in the top, well, you got a big old hole in the bottom where the money, the water money is just running out of there faster than it's coming in. That's the story.
And part of it is the fact that there's just not, in circles of people that really have a lot of power, there's not enough advocacy for spending on mental health care for Medicaid patients and indigent care. There's just not enough,
Especially for indigent.
especially for indigent. I think a lot of people aren't even aware that there is no funding for indigent care. There's not anybody in there really pounding the table for that. Well, there are some, but the really strong advocates are just not there.
See my comments about stigma?
Yeah, and I fully understand and appreciate that.
It's at the core of it.
It is, it is.
There's no regard
There's
for
no sense of
population.
community. You know, it falls back on community issue.
That's why you guys got a big job to do. They expect me to bellyache and whine
Sure.
about it.
Sure.
I mean, all I gotta worry about is 500 employees that don't have a place to get a paycheck.
Well, I've always said if it wasn't for the system that we have, and it needs to be improved, that if you think things are bad now, boo-hoo. And it could be a lot worse, and it would end up costing the counties and the state more than we're spending in the number of problems that we have, social problems we have.
Careful what you wish for.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I've advocated for that a lot, because it's true. It's correct. And it makes sense, really.
You better close out this pity party, huh?
Oh, God, let's go to another one.
It's all true.
Go to a
though.
bigger one.
It is.
All of this is true.
It is. I agree.
I appreciate people bearing with us. You can't get this in one time sitting down. Ira, the points you're making, Gary, the points you're making, Rick, I mean, you guys got the story now, Michael. Mike, I mean, you guys understand now, you can do the math yourself. You don't have to have us doing it for you. And that's, I would say, a great
Got any more
goal,
good news?
you know, for me to
Yeah,
have.
Clark, come on.
Come
on.
Tell us.
Tell us something good.
Yeah, you know, if they change the formula, great.
Expand Medicaid.
Yeah.
It's a big one that would move the needle.
I mean, all you really want to, you want to have cash on hand to cover your IBNR and your accounts payable and 60 days worth of cushion. Those are the two main things those are two main things you want to cover.
Any other good news?
Not for mine. I'm happy to entertain questions if anybody's got questions.
Questions? More questions, comments? Okay.
Do you guys want to approve the financial reports?
Well, sure, we were just waiting for you to mention that. No, yes, of course we did. Okay, is there a motion to approve, do we do them all at once?
Yes.
Okay, is there a motion? Mike makes a motion and Gary seconds it. Michael votes for it too. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Double second.
That's right, Nancy. Hesitate there 1 second.
Sorry.
Okay, that's all right. Okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. All right, thank you, everyone.